Alright guys, it's time to kick off this session of the Finnish Azure User Group's Tips and Tricks session. Just a fair warning before we begin, I was out of work or out of the office basically for the last 2 days, and I've been catching up on everything today and been really busy, so I have not prepared any of what I'm about to tell you, apart from this presentation that I did in a few minutes. So I guess this is also to show you that you don't really have to prepare that much for these presentations. So if you feel like you have something you would like to share one of these sessions, I'm sure that Pasi and Sakke will be happy to have you, even if you don't prepare any of this, or maybe this is the last time I will ever do this, who knows. But yeah, let's kick it off. So my topic today is to tell you a war story. It's been my life for the past 10 months or so, almost a year actually, about trying to automate an almost legacy feature on Azure. And as you probably saw in the synopsis of this meetup or this session, it's about Azure DevTest Labs, but I will tell you more in just a second. Those of you who haven't seen me before here or somewhere else, my name is Mika Haapsaari. I'm a senior cloud architect based in Amsterdam. Why I'm talking a Finnish Azure user group, I don't know, but I am Finnish, so that's probably why. And I have been talking in these meetups before a few times, so you might have seen me there. As I mentioned, I'm based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and I'm also the lead of the Azure practice here since a few weeks. And yeah, I have been working in IT for the past 11 years-ish, and 6 of those has been more or less full-time on Azure. So the topic today, as mentioned, is Azure DevTest Labs and automating the crap out of it, or at least trying to do that. So what exactly is Azure DevTest Labs? Really briefly. According to the marketing pitch on azure.microsoft.com, it is a platform that enables developers to efficiently self-manage VMs and also pass platform as a service resources that can be connected to those virtual machines. So namely databases, service bus clusters, stuff like this. You can also automate with it. Yeah, so it's a self-service portal for virtual machines. That's roughly all there is to it. But as you will see in the next slides, it's something more, or it can be something more than that as well. So as mentioned, DevTest Labs platform or the feature itself, it's a self-service environment. So the natural pro of DevTest Labs is that it gives developers or whoever is using those virtual machines better form of freedom. It gives them a way of creating virtual machines, creating development environments or testing environments or lab environments in a standardized way without need of approval processes. They don't even actually need any RBAC privileges in Azure apart from reader access. So DevTest Labs can have a built-in process of approving those creations of environments without actually having, let's say, owner access or contributor access or anything like that. So it gives more freedom to the guys using it, namely, I guess, probably developers or some lab users are the common or the most common audience for it. And it also limits the needs of, let's say the admin team or the IT team or whoever is the person responsible normally to give someone a new environment. Mostly this is of course a problem in bigger um, companies like enterprises and let's say more hierarchy focused companies that you need to have an approval to get something done basically. And also there are some benefits you can get, especially for the admin team, in terms of um, let's say compared to a free-for-all where anyone can do whatever they want inside a subscription. Let's say with DevTest Labs they can give a more better cost control tooling. For example, well, of course, auto shutdown nowadays is pretty much built into all virtual machines in Azure, but back in the day it wasn't. And it can give you more granular control into budgeting, for example. But the bigger picture, basically, the biggest benefit of the feature is the standardized environments, so you can create exactly the same type of VM with the same image, with the same software pre-installed than the last guy did. You can have them use the same kind of database with the same settings. You can give them the same environment in a standardized way. Of course, nowadays there are also other ways to do this, like Azure Blueprints, for example, is more or less the same thing, but let's not get into that. Yeah, on top of that, the admin team can get pre-approved software, which they call artifacts in DevTest Labs. So you can create a repository where you tell the developers that these are the software you can install, and then they can install it themselves. I'll get back to how that works in a few minutes, but it's not as great as you would hope it would be. And in case of this customer, for example, the big benefit was that you can use your own images to create these VMs, which can be used from a shared image gallery, which is something that they included just, I think, like a year ago into this feature, which is pretty handy. So these are the pros of the DevTest Labs. It's yeah, you can achieve most of these things, if not all of them, doing something else in Azure. For example, I mentioned blueprints or something like that. You can have all of this done separately, but of course DevTest Labs is combining all of these in a way, maybe not all the way as much as you would hope, which leads us to the cons. The reason that some of these features that you would want are not there or not working as you would expect them to be is that DevTest Labs was released a month before Azure Resource Manager, so ARM, was released, or at least published. So you could almost say that DevTest Labs is as old as Azure itself in its current form. So it's a 6-year-old feature in a cloud that is barely 10 years old. So you can see why not all of the features that they currently offer are maybe up to the par that you would hope it would be. Let's call it that. And on top of that, the active development of DevTest Labs stopped somewhere in 2017. I was trying to find the exact when and why it stopped, but at least after 2017 there has been barely any blog posts or new features, actual new features released. Mostly it's been just adjusting to the way that Azure rolls out other new features. For example, DevTest Labs has support for Azure Bastion, but it's not because they wanted DevTest Labs to have that feature, it's because they wanted Azure Bastion to have the feature to support DevTest Labs, so that those kinds of feature inclusions have been raised by other features than the DevTest Labs itself. And the third and most annoying, most critical thing that lacks in DevTest Labs when it comes to automating things is that Powershell commandlets, Azure CLI commands, and the API, the REST API for Azure, all of them have different capabilities when it comes to DevTest Labs. So it's not uniform, it's not standard what they provide in PowerShell or Azure CLI, for example. So you can do different things with it, which it's not only DevTest Labs that does that, but it's something that they are actually at least trying to make it better, that doesn't happen. So you can just choose a tool that you want to do programmatically things and it should work. So you can choose PowerShell if you're more into that, or you can choose Azure CLI and you won't know the difference, like feature-wise, what you can do. But in this case, it's not the case. You need to choose method of programmatically doing things based on what you need to do, which is not ideal. And the below or the sub bullet there also mentions that it's not available, which is what I ran into a few weeks into the project that I'm talking about in a second. Is that not everything is available in either of those three. So there's no PowerShell commandlets, no a CLI commands, nor there is an API that is publicly exposed to do certain things, which is also not ideal when you're trying to automate something and doing something programmatically. But yeah, that is what it is. So the project itself that I'm talking about here, it was an interesting project right off the bat because they had decided that they didn't really ask us what we would recommend them to do in terms of having these kind of environments, but they had decided that they want DevTest Labs. And on top of that, they wanted to do a list of requirements that was pretty extensive, which were mostly revolving around making it secure, making it as fast as possible to get new environments, first of all, and new virtual machines into developers' use, and yeah, making a VM as secure as possible, with them having as much freedom as possible without the admin team having to be in the middle of most of it, or not at all, ideally. Yeah, and the, let's say, smaller asks, but what are pretty crucial when you think about actually automating stuff is the possibility to create and scrap VMs however you wish. So basically that means immutable storage, shared storage, persistent storage. You need to have resources tied to a specific user, for example, in Azure, and all these kinds of things, which made an interesting challenge when you think about what the feature actually can natively do. So luckily, the ask also included that everything has to be in Azure DevOps. So we can, the only limit we had is that if you can't do it in Azure DevOps, don't do it. So of course, you can do pretty much everything in Azure DevOps, which is good for us in this case. Yeah, so how we ended up doing this, it was a project of, it cuts off a little bit in the bottom half, but yeah, it's nothing important. Project itself was on a pretty tight schedule, so we did this kind of a design together with the customer of the most critical aspects of what needs to be automated and in what stage, so we can get the first teams operational as quickly as possible. So the actual development process was, I would say, from the end of August till the beginning of November. And then in the beginning of November, we started to deploy these resources and onboarding the teams into this into these environments. So basically, the teams were divided based on application teams inside the customer, and each of those teams had different requirements in terms of, let's say, pre-installed software that they need to use in their VMs. So they would need to be divided somehow. They would need different kinds of connectivity. The customer in this case uses the hub and spoke model in Azure, and depending on the team, they could either use, let's say, resource in another spoke subscription in Azure, or on-premise, or through the internet in another cloud, or there were different requirements. So we would need to also automate as much as possible that connectivity scenario, or those connectivity scenarios that they were used to having previously. Actually, I'm already halfway through the time slot that I've been given, so I'm trying to go through this fairly quickly. The basis of the whole thing that we created is, of course, DevTest Labs. What I want to highlight here is the things that we did. The shared image gallery, we provided them images that are hardened, first of all. The CenterNet for Internet Security hardening was implemented on all of those, so that's already 85%, especially on Windows, that you have to consider when you want to make something as secure as possible. So we provided them that. We gave each user a persistent storage with Azure files and FSLogix. So FSLogix gives them the ability to have a kind of a roaming profile, where instead of it being a file server where it stores the profile like in traditional Windows environments, it stores it in Azure files. And as such, they can bring it with them when they, let's say, scrap a VM and they create a new one, and it's automatically available for them. We did a lot of PowerShell and desired state configuration, which of course is to standardize each environment and making sure that there's no drift in configurations inside the VMs. So especially the cybersecurity team was pretty adamant about certain things that need to be there security-wise, and this is how we then control it. And that's also mentioned here that the security team also required quite a lot of agents for security scanning purposes, and those had to be configured, and it's a whole thing. We provided pre-approved repositories of software, mostly using the chocolatey package manager, which is of course in Windows, I guess, the easiest way of doing controlled and centralized way of installing software. It's really the only option you kind of have, or at least the most simplest one to use. Yeah, those are basically the core functionalities that we provided them. Then, of course, each VM, whether it's Linux or Windows, would be joined into the Azure AD domain. They would have network connectivity in their on-premise environments through a Barracuda firewall cluster. They had a proxy for internet egress control, and all of this is created inside a single pipeline in Azure DevOps, which then, let's say, if a new team would have, actually mentioning the pros that we got for the teams later in this slideshow. But, basically, a single team handles all of this, plus some more in the next slide. So because we ended up seeing that not all of the things that Azure DevTest Labs kind of supports so is available in the features it offers. So there's kind of these features that are 50%, 60% there, but it's not really exactly what we wanted to do. So we decided to introduce this kind of, let's say, event-based automation inside the subscriptions that the teams are using. So we would deploy an event grid into each environment of the users or the user teams, and based on an action that the user creates on the subscription, in these cases that I selected here, if the user claims a VM in DevTest Labs, so if you're not familiar with it, a user without any kind of access to the environment, they can claim a VM, and that gives them ownership of that VM, so they can stop it, they can start it, they can apply software artifacts to it, they can add and remove data disks, that sort of stuff. But there was no way natively, basically, to see who does a certain VM belong to. You could only see that it's claimed by someone, but you couldn't see who it belonged to. So we created an event grid domain that listens to an event that someone claims a VM, and then it would do an Azure tag on that VM, so that we could also have an inventory of what belongs to who. And also another one that we ended up having some sort of a problem with is, of course, the leftover data disks. So most, if not all, of the users would create a data disk for themselves when they create a VM, which is also included in the pipelines that we offered them. When they then eventually remove that VM, they would be left a data disk that is unattached, and yeah, most normal users don't really care about kind of maintaining that environment in a way that they would actually then go and delete that VM disk or that data disk from the VM. So we did another event-based trigger that listens to that, listens to the event that removes the VM, and then parses that event JSON from the activity log and gets the data disk name, and then that function app then removes that disk. So it's yeah, these are the two options that I wanted to give you. There are some more, but in the sake of time, I'm not gonna go through them. But basically, the event-based automation is the thing that kind of gave us that extra flexibility on a lot of things that we sort of kind of feel like should be already there, given to you by the feature or Azure itself, but for some reason aren't there. So their PowerShell and PowerShell-based functions really came in to help and were really useful in this project. And I strongly recommend doing these kinds of event-based automation scenarios. They're really fun to make, and yeah, highly recommend. I have 5 minutes left. So what I actually wanted to bring into the table with this presentation is that Azure DevOps, PowerShell, Azure CLI, and the Azure APIs are pretty awesome. So if you ever find yourself saying in a customer meeting or in front of a customer saying that it's not possible, I suggest that you think again, because there are a number of ways you can do stuff that isn't maybe natively there. It probably isn't easy to do, or it's not fast to do something, but it can be challenged quite far that something wouldn't be possible in Azure. Like, you can do most things yourself, you just have to grind and do a lot of stuff. that isn't there out of the box. What I also learned is that, yeah, as I mentioned in the preface of this session, is that DevTest Labs isn't the most sexiest feature in Azure, or it's not maybe the best built, or it's not maybe doesn't work in a way that you could possibly hope it would, but you can still make it useful. You can still provide the extra value for your customer, or you can especially showcase your skills in automating stuff that maybe shouldn't be automated, or whatever you are looking to achieve. But for example, in this case, although it might have sometimes felt to me that why am I actually doing this project, but when I heard the positive feedback from the customer that they would actually have to wait for even 5 business days, not always, but sometimes, from their on-premise partner to get a new VM that they would do this job in before, is now dropped to roughly 45 minutes. It would even be faster without all the pre-installed software and all that. But on roughly the rough average is the 45 minutes. I think that made the developers happy. They can get easier access to new environments faster, and in this case, the admins don't really have to do any of the admin work that they needed to do before. And on top of that, the creme a la creme is that the security team is happy because they got the standardized environments that they didn't really before have, and now they have a way of doing secure environments for all of their developers. So all in all, not the most comfortable project, but by far one of the most interesting ones in terms of doing stuff that is maybe a little bit new, or something that is not in the comfort zone of the everyday automation that we, at least at Northcloud, do. But yeah, it was fun. That's the lesson I learned. I actually added a Q&A slide to this, but I realized that I can't see the chat on YouTube at least, so I will skip the Q&A. So thank you for all of your questions on this. If you want to ask me something after this session, which is ending in 1 minute, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or whatever method you feel comfortable with, and I will gladly answer your questions. Thank you all for joining, and I will see you in the next one.